My goal in life is to eradicate the fast fashion industry, one person at a time. If you can learn how to create the perfect fit for your body, choose the right fabric, and make super high quality custom pieces, you never have to rely on fast fashion again. So let's get into it. When you started sewing, you only used woven fabrics. And then when you start using stretch fabrics, it's completely different and it's so much harder. And even though it's easier to fit knit fabrics, it can be so much harder to sew with knit fabrics. If you want to learn more about how to make the perfect clothes for you, you should come join my school community. In Better Fit Studio, I teach you how to make better clothes. It's the perfect place to ask your questions, share your progress, and sew your dream wardrobe. First, let's just talk about the difference between wovens and knits. This is a woven illustration, and then knits on the right. Horizontal lines, and then you have vertical lines, and they come together to create a fabric that is stiff and not stretchy. And knits is the same technique as a knit sweater, but on a much smaller scale. So if you look really, really closely at your t-shirt, you can see these V shapes that you see on knit garments. It's just made like on a huge machine and very, very tiny threads. So that is the main difference. And in the way this kind of fabric is made makes it stretchy regardless of the material. So we call that mechanical stretch. Just how the fabric is made, how the threads come together, that makes it stretchy. And then we can make it even more stretchy if we add a stretchy material as well. So that's fiber stretch. So if you have a knit with mechanical stretch and then you add spandex, elastane, anything like that, lycra, it's going to be even more stretchy and have better recovery. My name is Josephine. I'm a sewing mentor, fitting expert, and I've been working in the fashion industry for the past 10 years. And now I take all of the knowledge and all of the experience to teach you how to make better clothes. So, stretch, we talk about stretch, the direction of stretch, but also how much stretch in percentage. 30 to 50% is like a normal amount of stretch. That is the most common. Usually on your pattern, like if you're working with a pattern, you will see the required amount of stretch to use that pattern. And it can say 30% two-way stretch or 50% four-way stretch. And two-way and four-way. So two-way stretch, I actually have fabrics to show you to illustrate. I'm just going to pin myself so you can see me bigger. So first, this is a fabric. This is a single jersey, a very normal t-shirt fabric. This is the most common jersey fabric, and you can stretch it a lot on the cross grain and also a lot on the regular grain. So the grain line goes like this. So if I hold it like this, the grain line is vertical. So this is the cross grain then. And this is two ways, and then four ways becomes the other way. And that is the most common one. And this is a double knit, a Ponte di Roma. And when I hold it like this, the grain line is vertical and it has a lot of stretch this way. But on the grain line, it's not like almost not stretchy at all, just a tiny little bit. And this is really important to keep in mind when you are pairing your fabric with your pattern. Because if your fabric has only two-way stretch, you cannot use it for a pattern that requires four-way stretch. So something that requires four-way stretch is like activewear, swimwear, tights, a really form-fitting garment. So if it's a really tight dress, it might need the four-way stretch for the sizing to make sense. So anything like that, anything that is really tight to the body or requires like activewear requires some kind of performance. So you have to really be able to move in it, then you need four-way stretch. Yeah, so just pay attention to what fabric you select for which pattern, and you will be fine. And sewing machine. So if you have a regular sewing machine, that's all you need. And you just have to pay attention to the settings. You don't need a serger or an overlocker to get started. It's perfectly fine to just use your regular sewing machine. The way we do that is seam that you use needs to be as stretchy as the fabric. Otherwise, the seam is going to break. So using a regular zigzag is usually enough for most fabric types, depending on how stretchy it is. I'm just going to talk about stitches first. So the first one here is a regular zigzag, and you can have a lot of different settings on a zigzag stitch. You can make it really wide and short, or you can make it really small. It really depends on the look you want and how stretchy it is. Always good to test the amount of stretch on the exact fabric that you're going to use. So use a scrap and test if it stretches with the fabric. The lightning stitch, this is quite a common one as well. As you can see, you get more length in the stitch than a regular zigzag. That means you can stretch it out more than if you use a zigzag, and that means you can use it for stretchier fabrics. The other ones, I never really use these kinds of stitches. I think they look a bit weird, and I'm just fine with zigzag or the lightning stitch. If you don't have the lightning stitch, just try with a regular zigzag. What you can also play around with your normal sewing machine, just the tension. So you might need to lower the tension when you're working with knits, so that the fabric has more room to play, and it doesn't become too tight. Just use scrap fabrics and play around with the tension. Usually only the top thread needs to lower the tension a little bit for it to work. And then needles. So here are the three most common needles. The universal one, this is what you can use for everything. And you can even use this for knits, especially if they are really stable knits, like the double knit I showed you, the blue one. But what's better to use is a ballpoint. As you can see here, it is not as sharp, and that is so it doesn't cut the fibers. So instead of having this spike that kind of cuts through the fibers, it goes between the fibers in a more gentle way so the threads don't break. And then we also have the stretch needle, and this is specifically for swimwear, lycra, activewear, those kinds of fabrics where you need a sharper point to avoid skipped stitches. With those kinds of activewear fabrics, is we can get skipped stitches. So for most regular clothing, in regular jersey fabrics, you can just use the ballpoint. And then the stretch is specifically for those lycra type fabrics. Yeah, settings, we already talked about that. Let's talk about thread then. So in most cases, you can use a normal thread. If you're making everyday wear clothes, you're making tops, t-shirts, whatever, you can use a normal thread. But there are different options. So an elastic thread, this is something I had never tried until like a year ago. Ceraflex is a Gutermann thread, and it's a stretchy thread that helps you be able to sew a straight stitch and keep it stretchy. And that's really interesting. So I've tried it a couple times and it really works. So it's not as stretchy as using an overlock seam, for example, but it works for most regular garments. And you can even use it combined with a stretchy stitch if you want to have really stretchy things. So if you want to be able to sew swimwear on a regular machine, you could use stretchy thread and a zigzag, and you would be fine. So that's really interesting. I think it worked surprisingly well. If you find it hard, like on some machine, it's hard to get the settings right for stretch, then you can try the stretchy thread. And then there's also a thread called woolly nylon. This is specifically for like swimwear and activewear. Usually, I see people use this for an overlocker or a serger or a cover stitch machine. So when it's really specifically for those kinds of garments, I have never found the need to use woolly nylon myself, but I don't sew a lot of those kinds of garments either. So maybe that explains why. But that's something to look into if you're really into swimwear and you want to make a lot. So it basically is a loosely spun thread. It looks a bit like yarn, but then when you stretch it, it becomes really thin. And that's usually what's used if you buy a bikini, a swimsuit somewhere. That's the kind of thread they use for those garments. And another tip, if you want to use your regular sewing machine, is to get a walking foot. This is a walking foot. I feel like such a YouTuber. Like, look, this is my walking foot. So this is something that you just put on your regular machine. It walks on your fabric. So instead of you having to feed the fabric through, it kind of walks on the fabric and feeds it through really evenly. And this is especially good to use with like a twin needle to make a hem on knits. And I think you can get this for most machines. I just searched for my machine make and model and walking foot, and then I found one that works for mine. So maybe they are a bit more common for newer machines. I don't really know, but I find that hemming with a twin needle works best with my vintage machine, anyways, and I don't even need the walking foot. So it's also something you can try and play around with. I take on a couple of students each month for my private mentorship. If you're interested in what it would look like to work with me one on one, you can apply through the link in the description. I really like a rotary cutter for cutting out my knits. I think it's much easier to just place pattern weights on your fabric and then cut it out with a rotary cutter. So that is also a tip. I find that much easier. And for wovens, I sometimes prefer to cut with scissors. It's just a matter of preference. And you can definitely, like, if you don't have a rotary cutter, you don't have to get it just because you're making a knit garment. But I find it really speeds things up. And hemming, we talked about using a twin needle combined with the walking foot. That's my favorite method. But sometimes, if I'm a bit lazy and I don't want to switch to my twin needle, I just use a zigzag stitch for that as well. And it really depends on the kind of look you're going for. You could even use the stretch thread and use a single seam if you want to have more of a clean look. That's also a possibility. Just pay attention to not stretching out the fabric when you're hemming. That's what a walking foot really helps with. I'm going to see just in the chat. Do you need a certain surface to use a rotary cutter? Yes. Good question. So you need a cutting mat with your rotary cutter. I have one that is always on my table. So regardless of if I use my scissors or if I'm drawing something, in a lot of my videos, you will see this pink mat in the background. That's my cutting mat. It's a self-healing cutting mat. I got mine on Amazon, I think. Really, mine is too small. I would like one that covers like the whole table. So I'm quite limited to the size of the pattern pieces. So it would be great to have a bigger one, or you can even put two next to each other to get a bigger surface. Yeah, so you cannot use a rotary cutter like just on the table because you will damage it. Yeah, and here was just an example I found really helpful. So for different seams, we have stretch needle on the left, and then we have stretch needle and stretch thread. And then we have a universal needle, remember, like the really pointy one. And here we have a lot of skipped stitches. And then we have a stretch needle, but we also have different feet. The seam that looks really great here is stretch needle, walking foot, but no stretch thread. And then we have the universal foot. As you can see, the fabric here is kind of wobbly, so it doesn't keep straight. This could potentially be saved by pressing. But what happens if you stretch the fabric too much is this. So you want to really almost even pushing the fabric into the machine as you go instead of dragging it to prevent this effect. And this is what we really want to avoid with the skipped stitches. So that's why it's really important to use the ballpoint or stretch needle.